Here are 3 of the most disturbing police sketches and the chilling backstories behind them. Number 1 is Mr. Cruel. This is an unknown man who was never caught but was a serial child predator who was targeting Australia through the late 80s. Described as a brutal assailant, he was also very cautious to conceal his identity and was always seen wearing a tightly fitted ski mask so that his victims could only see through to his eyes. Number 2 is the Eerie-Eyed Man. This is an infamously haunting sketch of a repeat window voyeur who had at least one credible account of entry and assault of a woman. Reported in 2016 and made famous for the unsettling features and disturbingly oversized eyes, this sketch is a haunting reminder that the suspect has never been caught and is still out there somewhere. Number 3. I actually find this one really difficult to look at for some reason. It's just very upsetting and distressing. This is actually a sketch of a suspect who would later be known as the Baton Rouge Killer. Initially a miss, police believed they were looking for a white male when in fact they would be looking for a suspect named Derek Todd Lee. But despite the sketch looking very different from the actual suspect, what's really eerie about it is that this is the expression that the victim remembers seeing on the suspect's face on the night of the attack. I don't know if it's the slightly distorted features or it's that kind of emotionless stare, but there's something about this picture that just doesn't sit right. 3 of the most disturbing facial reconstructions of unknown people. Number 1 is the suitcase body. Before finally being identified as Jenny Gomez, her decomposed remains were found in a suitcase and then sketched by police. The state of her body was not good, and sadly this sketch is almost unrecognizable and doesn't really look like it has features of a normal person. Number 2 is the woman of Oklahoma Road. Discovered off I-40, when the remains were finally found, they were so badly decayed that police initially couldn't determine the sex of the body. Reconstructions of the skull indicated a very unusual bone structure and a body that only stood at about 4'8". This would have been a very recognizable person, but no one ever came forward to claim that they knew the woman of Oklahoma Road. Number 3 is the Ina Jane Doe. I don't like looking at this picture at all. It's really bad. It was in 1993 that the severed head of a disabled woman was found by a group of children in Illinois hanging from a bush. An attempt was made to reconstruct her features, but no one ever identified her. It was deemed as pretty unusual that a disabled woman wouldn't have anyone identify her, as she most likely had contact with either doctors or even a caretaker at some point. The Ina Jane Doe remains an unknown, and this reconstruction is by far one of the most disturbing. Imagine if your grandparents just disappeared, like completely without a trace. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is the haunting story of Charles and Catherine Romer. On April 8th of 1980, a wealthy elderly couple named Charles and Catherine check into a Holiday Inn right off I-95. They're just on their way home from a vacation. But to put this in context, this wasn't a usual choice for them. These were 2 very well-off people, so to choose a Holiday Inn, it wouldn't have been typical of them. But not long after checking into their room, the couple seemingly vanished. After 2 or 3 days, hotel management became concerned that they hadn't seen the couple leave their room, so they went to go check on them. This was only to find that their room had never been slept in. Inside the room were all of their clothes, their travel diary, and over $60,000 of Catherine's jewelry. Hotel staff then goes out to the parking lot and finds that their car is missing, but no one ever saw them leave. At the time, only one witness comes forward saying that they saw this car miles away at a restaurant circuit, but after they interviewed people at the restaurant, nobody remembered seeing this couple. Despite search efforts, they were never found after that night, and no one really knows what happened to them. Here are 3 of the most disturbing police sketches and the chilling backstories behind them. Number 1, The Night Stalker. Easily one of the most haunting and well-circulated sketches of the 80s, the Night Stalker terrorized Los Angeles. Described with a wretched smell and rotted teeth, he'd spent months breaking into homes to brutally mutilate seemingly anyone. Number 2, The Zeb Quinn Woman. This was a digital composite created of the suspected woman who was last seen in Zeb Quinn's car. If you don't know the story, Zeb was 18 years old when he disappeared. Only his car was found with a pair of lips drawn on the window with lipstick and a live puppy inside. Witnesses reported seeing this woman driving the car, but she was gone before the car was reported. Till this day, Zeb has never been found, and they have never been able to identify who this woman was. Number 3, The Lake Bodom Murderer. In 1964, teenagers camping at Lake Bodom were bludgeoned and stabbed through their tent with only one survivor. Witnesses who were up early that morning reported seeing this man running from their campsite around 6 a.m. The man was never identified, but a photo cropped up from the funerals of the teenagers, showing a man who bore a striking resemblance to the suspect. This was also a man that no one claimed to know. All investigators have ever been left with in the case is this sketch. Caution, as there is a police sketch shown in this story that some people find distressing. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is the disappearance of Zeb Quinn. On January 2nd of 2000, 18-year-old Zeb Quinn leaves his shift at work to go look at buying a new car with his friend Robert. Surveillance footage from a gas station confirms that they were together, but then Zeb's pager goes off and he has to make an emergency call at a payphone. Allegedly, Zeb doesn't say what the call is about and then abruptly cancels their plans. The next day, his job gets a call saying that he's going to be out sick, but they realize that it wasn't Zeb on the phone. It was actually Robert pretending to be Zeb. He later goes on to say that Zeb had contacted him asking him to call him out sick from work as a favor. But all of this is very suspicious, so Zeb's mother reports her son missing. On January 6th, Zeb's car is discovered right outside the hospital where his mother works. It was found with lips drawn on the window in lipstick, a live puppy inside, and a jacket that did not belong to him. Witnesses reported seeing this woman driving the car just before it was reported to police. She's gone before the car is reported, and she has never been identified, nor has Zeb ever been found. One of the newer developments is that the friend Robert was actually convicted of a murder which was unrelated in 2015, which prompted a search warrant. Police found elements of fabrics and unknown particles that they deemed sufficient to be able to connect and prove his involvement in Zeb's disappearance. I don't know why the details of this are so murky and why they won't say what they found, but as of 2021, Robert has been charged with the murder. But there are still gaps in this story about what evidence turned up and exactly who this woman was who was seen in the car. 3 of the most disturbing facial reconstructions of unknown people. Number 1 is Septic Tank Sam. Many people find this reconstruction to be very unsettling, but the context of the victim is actually so much worse. Discovered by a couple in 1977, the body had been stuffed into a septic tank and was wrapped in a yellow bedsheet. His remains had suffered such severe beatings and torture as well as sexual mutilation, it took them months just to determine the sex of the body. Decades later, through DNA evidence, they were finally able to determine that these were the remains of 26-year-old Gordy Sanderson. However, the nature of the murder has never been determined. Number 2, Maria. Discovered in 1952, the remains were found in Black Hawk, Colorado, and they effectively named her Maria until they could determine her identity. But they never did. Examiners found that she had been struck in the head and that she may have been burned alive, but they're not certain. This reconstruction is pretty indicative of very early techniques and sadly wasn't very helpful so they could identify who she was, and she remained Maria. Number 3, the Montrose Jane Doe. This was a really horrific restoration that was later revised into something that would be more recognizable. The cause of death was never determined, but the suspicious nature of the body indicated this was most likely a homicide. Her older reconstruction was later archived as more modern composites were made. But till this day, the case is still cold, and she remains only known as the Montrose Jane Doe. Does a photo like this make you feel uncomfortable? Or something like this? This phenomenon is known as the Uncanny Valley. Introduced by Masahiro Mori in the 1970s, the Uncanny Valley refers to a phenomenon where our brains can register that something is very close to human, but we're also aware that something's not quite right. It's the in-between, where we can process that something looks like a person, but it's not a person, and it causes feelings of distress. Believed to be an evolutionary mechanism, which is also not exclusive to just humans, the Uncanny Valley is where we perceive these things to be a threat or not of us, and it can cause feelings of panic. One of the most well-known modern examples of this was actually an early test screening of Shrek in 2000, where Fiona was rendered as very hyper-realistic. So realistic that it surpassed the threshold of comfort in cartoon and moved into the Uncanny Valley. The children actually became so panicked at this screening, they were reported to be crying at the movie anytime she came on the screen. The entire film had to be halted and she was re-rendered. I'm not sure if this was the actual earliest version of Fiona that made it to the screening, but to put this in context, the one that made it to worldwide theaters is right above. But I did happen to find this monster from some of the early test footage of Shrek. The Uncanny Valley is still a widely unstudied phenomenon, but it continues to become more and more pervasive in entertainment as well as our modern animation. How is it possible for an entire group of people to hear or see someone who doesn't actually exist? Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is the unexplained mystery of Frida Sofia. In 2017, Mexico was hit with a devastating earthquake that crushed multiple buildings. One of those buildings being a school right in Mexico City. There were, of course, numerous children and adults who were trapped under the rubble, but there was one girl in particular who caught the attention of the media. A 12-year-old girl trapped under the debris who was responding to rescuers saying that her name was Frida Sofia. There was round-the-clock coverage, and a nation assembled around the story of Frida, and she became a symbol of hope in these efforts to rescue the children and her. Rescuers and journalists had multiple accounts of speaking with Frida and confirmed that she was far down beneath the rubble underneath a piece of granite but physically stable. There are some responders who report even seeing her wiggle her fingers far down through a crack in the debris. But here's the problem. Frida did not exist. The school actually comes forward and makes a statement saying that they have all children accounted for and they have never had a record of a girl named Frida Sofia. Multiple stations and people of leadership have to come forward and make statements of retraction and say that she's not down there, she never was, and she's not real. Suspected of being one of the largest cases of mass hysteria in modern history, it is completely unexplained how there were so many separate accounts of people who claim to speak to her or even see her beneath the rubble. Ultimately, the existence of Frida is a complete mystery, and there are still some people who believe she was really down there in that debris. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. Here are 3 unexplained photos and the chilling backstories behind them. Number 1. Motion detected. Shared in 2017, this was a photo alert sent to a man's phone when it was captured on his motion detection camera while he was out. Initially, when spotted, he panicked and assumed this could be a break-in, but the home was found without any trace of an intruder and nothing had been moved or stolen. All that was left was this image showing that someone or something was in that house. Number 2. Dry dock. In 2014, a dry dock ship was in the process of being dismantled. A single foreman was instructed to show pictures showing the exterior and interior to date progress. While traveling through the dark of the ship, only lighting his way by flash and lantern, he later realized he caught this picture. When enhanced, an unknown man holding an axe can be seen lurking within the dark of the ship. The ship was searched by a military team, but no one was ever found, and there is no security footage showing anyone leaving the ship to the dock. Number 3. Stairway to Heaven. The Haiku Staircase in Oahu, Hawaii is largely forbidden due to the dangerous drops, but in 2015, 18-year-old Dalen Pua decided to climb it solo while sending pictures to his family. But after sending some of those final photos, he was never seen again. A search suspected that he may have fell, but that wasn't the case. His body was never found, and search canines couldn't detect where his scent had gone. The final photo he sent that morning was re-examined and found something chilling. When zoomed in, you can clearly see the outline of an unknown man who was crouching nearby in the woods. The man has never come forward, and Dalen's disappearance remains unknown. I've never researched a case that has had more unexplainable circumstances than this. This is the mystery of Dyatlov Pass. For those who aren't familiar with the story, this is in 1959 when 9 experienced Russian hikers are reported missing after a mountain expedition. A search crew was sent to look for them, and what they found was horrific. Their tent was there, but it had been cut from the inside as if they were trying to escape it. The search party that was there didn't find any evidence of a threat outside of the tent, so why they cut their way out was completely unknown. But even stranger than that, the footprints that were found outside of the tent indicated that after they cut their way out, they weren't running. They were just walking normally. The bodies are all discovered kind of scattered in a several-mile radius throughout the snow, some of them half-dressed. 6 of them died from hypothermia, and 3 of them died from an unknown blunt force trauma causing severe damage to the skull and chest. 2 of them are found without eyes, 1 with their tongue cut out, and 1 without eyebrows. 1 of the bodies also tested positive for unusually high levels of radiation in their clothing. The most widely accepted theory is that this was some kind of an avalanche that had melted by the time the search party came, and that the missing eyes and tongue were just attributed to animals. But let's talk about some contradicting evidence here. These were 9 very experienced hikers that would know enough not to set up camp in any sort of a danger zone, nor was there any evidence that an avalanche even occurred by the time the search party came. That, in addition to the slow-moving footprints outside of the tent when they were supposedly trying to outrun this avalanche, or even the radiation in the clothing. The case has never conclusively been closed, but no one really knows for sure what they saw that night that made them cut their way out of their tent. 3 of the most disturbing police sketches and the chilling backstories behind them. Number 1. The Handyman. On the night of June 5th, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her bed at knife point by this man. Her little sister was right in the same room pretending to sleep while everything went down. The immediate suspect was a handyman who had worked on the house just a few months prior. Despite being chilling, that sketch actually led investigators on a credible tip that took them to Brian Mitchell and his wife, where they had been keeping Elizabeth in remote captivity for 9 months. Number 2. The Newborn Woman. On March 10th, 2007, at 1:20 in the morning, an unknown woman was seen roaming the hospital floor at Lakeside Hospital. Dressed as a nurse in scrubs, she abducted a newborn baby girl that night and then seemingly disappeared. Through anonymous tips, she was located within 48 hours, but the way she was able to scour the hospital and evade security remains completely unknown. Number 3. Lime Lady. This actually isn't a sketch of a suspect, but a victim. In 1980, the body of an unknown woman was discovered by 2 fishermen near a river. She had been covered in quicklime in an effort to decompose her, but it actually counteracted and she was preserved. For more than 40 years, she remained an unknown woman, and this sketch was a haunting reminder of her missing identity. But in 2020, DNA evidence was finally able to identify her as 20-year-old Tamara Lee Tagard, who went missing while on a walk just 4 months prior. Her remains are now known, but the reason for her murder is not. What's what's the first thing that you think when looking at these pictures? For anybody who has childhood memories of Televisa and Channel 5, this was part of a nightly broadcast as a PSA to show missing people throughout the late 90s. But this is the photo that caught everyone's attention, Celine Delgado. Audiences noticed there was something kind of off about her. The photo wasn't like the others. It was grainy, it was black and white, and there was seemingly almost no information on her. An inquiry into the public files of Mexico City found that there was no record of a missing woman who was named Celine Delgado. So why was Channel 5 running an image of a woman who wasn't missing? Sleuths Online did a composite cross-comparison where her image was uploaded to a 3D modeling program and proven that it was an amalgamation of other images and that she wasn't a real person. But why? Things remained pretty quiet until that of late 2019 when Channel 5 began posting strange content without explanation. Every night around 3 a.m. there were a series of disturbing video clips that were posted to their public-facing Twitter account and then immediately deleted. But there was one video in particular that reignited the eerie feelings around Delgado. This video, entitled Celine. In it can be seen a distorted compilation of clips around an unknown woman, and then it was deleted immediately after posting. But truthfully, from a rational perspective, I could chalk this story up to any number of explanations. It could be hoaxes, it could be hackings, it could even be marketing. But the really strange part to me is why they would intentionally choose to show an image of a woman who didn't exist, and do so quietly for so many years. This is True Crime by State. Today we are starting with Alabama. I'd completely forgotten this story took place in Alabama at all. It is insane. This is the case of Dr. Amy Bishop. Dr. Bishop was a highly credentialed Harvard graduate who went on to be a biology professor at the University of Alabama. She was known to be standoffish. She had a lot of difficulty socializing with other colleagues in the department. She also had an incredibly dark past. When she was 15, she accidentally shot and killed her brother in their home with a family rifle during an argument. But following that acquittal, let's move forward a good number of years. This is February 12th, 2010. She had just been denied tenure at the university, and this would be her last semester. She was effectively non-renewed. She was fired. So on that February morning, Dr. Bishop teaches 2 classes for biology and then goes to attend a faculty meeting. So everyone is sitting at a conference table, and about 40 minutes into the meeting, she stands up in silence, turns to her side, and fires a 9mm execution style around the room. 3 of those professors are killed instantly, 3 more are wounded, and at some point her gun stalls, which gives them an opportunity to wrestle her, and they get her out of the room and they lock her out. Bishop is apprehended very quickly, and she's in complete denial of what she just did. She doesn't even understand that people are dead. She can't accept it. She was later charged with capital murder and narrowly escaped prosecution for the death penalty under a plea deal. The case of Dr. Bishop has haunted the university for years as to how someone who was capable of such atrocities was seemingly able to fly under the radar as more than just normal, but actually exceptional in academia. This is True Crime by State. Today we are covering Alaska. I went through a lot of cases for Alaska, but there was nothing that compared to Robert Hansen. Outwardly, Robert was a pretty successful person living in Alaska throughout the 70s and 80s. He owned a bakery, he had his own home, he even had a small private plane, and was a pretty accomplished hunter. But Robert had a dark past. He grew up with severe acne and a horrible stutter, and was often the subject of ridicule and rejection from the girls he liked. But in his twisted mind, that rejection bred a lifelong justification for revenge. It was routine for Robert to abduct young women in his car and then bring them home where they were tortured and assaulted. He'd then fly them on his private plane to a remote location to then release and hunt them through the woods as if it was sport. But it all changed with Cindy Paulson. When Cindy was captured, she was tortured and then handcuffed, and then she was brought to board his plane. While he was in and out of the car while loading the cockpit of the plane, she saw her chance. He had left the door unlocked. She kicks off her shoes to leave them in the car as evidence, sneaks out the driver's side, and makes a run for it. She gets away, but when found by police, they start to discredit her accusations because she's a sex worker and he's a well-liked community member, and they don't want to believe her. But she had specific knowledge of the plane and this hunting ritual, which matched an already open investigation, so they approved a search warrant. This uncovered almost all of the evidence they needed to link him to numerous bodies that were found on those hunting grounds. His sentencing would keep him in prison for the rest of his days. But if it hadn't been for Cindy, there's no knowing how long he would have gone on killing. I'm gonna show you a picture that you've probably seen before, but maybe don't want to again. The Dream Man. In 2008, this drawing was published and everybody saw it. It was accompanied with the tagline, "Have you seen this man?" The implication being that this was a familiar person to everyone that they had seen in their dreams, but it wasn't somebody they'd seen in real life. The photo gained a real sense of momentum by 2009 and was traced back to marketer Andrea Natella. Let's first note that this was released as a hoax. This is part of what Andrea does. He leans heavily into shock value tactics for marketing, and clearly it was very successful because it reached a lot of people. But even though it was debunked as just marketing, why was the image successful? Why were there so many people that had believed that they'd seen this man before, at least enough for it to go viral? One theory leans heavily into Jungian archetypes, which suggests we have a sort of preset collective unconsciousness that we can recognize and feel familiar around certain archetypal faces in different times of distress or in life. While still not completely understood and very much so just a theory, it's believed that the imprints of these archetypal faces are something that's inherited. It's a form of unconscious memory which was passed down from ancestors. So we can understand that as a theory. You know, it would explain the strange sense of familiarity that we all feel when looking at that face. But what are the origins of that? If we do have this sort of preset collective unconsciousness, why is it this face that fits into one of those archetypes that we all find to be familiar? Here are 3 of the most disturbing facial reconstructions and the chilling backstories behind them. But before we get started, I did make a YouTube channel for everybody who requested. If you want to subscribe, the link is right in the bio. Alright, let's get into it. Number 1. The Irondequoit Jane Doe. Found buried in a shallow grave in New York State, the manner of death was ruled as suspicious, but there were no signs of trauma found on her body. Once found, her remains were so badly decomposed that it's suspected she may have been buried there for up to 30 years before being uncovered. Number 2. The Philadelphia teen. Discovered to have been shot and possibly burned, his remains were found near the railroad tracks in Philadelphia in 1977, and he was the victim of a horrific homicide. To this day, he has never had any friends or family that have come forward to claim his identity, and he remains unknown. Number 3. The Swimsuit Boy. He is one of the only unidentified bodies to come from the Dean Corll serial killings. Discovered buried beneath the shed, among others, his remains were wearing a multicolored swimsuit, hence the name. And it's not at all that this is a bad reconstruction. It's actually unsettling to me because it's pretty good. When you're looking at it, it's almost like the eyes are looking right back at you. It's that realistic. But what makes it all that more eerie is that it's linked to a missing boy that no one has ever claimed. This is True Crime by State. Today we are covering Arizona. I know everybody thought I was going to do Jody on this, and I will do a video on her story, but this story floored me. This is the story of Phoenix, Arizona man Scott Falater, otherwise known as the Sleepwalker. On the night of January 16th, 1997, a neighbor wakes up to the sounds of screaming coming from next door. He then witnesses Scott dragging his wife of 20 years as her body lay lifeless and bloodied, and then pushes her head under the water of the backyard pool. Police rush to the scene and pull her out of the water and find that she had been stabbed 44 times. They find Scott right up the stairs and arrest him in the house and then usher his children to safety. The initial story, when he kind of comes to, is that he was in a deep state of sleepwalking. Okay, so you hear that, and the first thing you think is, this is bull. This is bull. But corroborating reports from his family and friends do indicate that he has a severe struggle with sleepwalking, and his defense actually goes on to argue this in court to plead for his innocence. Although the defense testimony is compelling, there is a witness that comes forward that says he saw him trying to calm down the family dog during the murder, which they believe can essentially prove that he was conscious and aware. He's served with a life sentence, but to this day, he maintains that he has no memory of the attack. Shockingly, this is not the first case of homicidal sleepwalking, which is terrifying, but this one in particular definitely stands out for the state. And truthfully, we'll never actually know whether or not he was or wasn't sleepwalking that night. Here are 3 seemingly normal pictures with very dark backstories. Number 1. The Whitaker family. What looks like maybe just a normal family out to dinner, this was actually the same night that Bart Whitaker had hired 2 friends to come and kill his entire family, plotting to do so for monetary gain. The only survivor of the hit was the father, who is not pictured here as he was the one taking this photo. Number 2. Green boots. Maybe this looks like just a snow hiker taking a break or a nap, but it's actually one of the hundreds of bodies that remain on Mount Everest, as the conditions are impossible to retrieve them. Because they are left, they remain only as landmarks for future hikers. Number 3. Carl Tanzler's doll. Maybe this looks like a poor rendition of a wax figure, but it's actually the corpse of Elena Hoyos. Following her death in her 20s, a man named Carl Tanzler became obsessed with her and ended up stealing and taxidermying her body, where it remained in his home and bed for 10 years. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. I really wanted to do this murder first because it's so creepy. This is the unexplained murder of room 1046. On January 2nd of 1935, a man who was going by the name of Roland T. Owen checked into the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. While staying in the hotel, there were multiple accounts of housekeeping finding him in the room, sitting upright on the bed, fully awake, fully dressed, and sitting in almost complete darkness alone. There was also a confirmed account of a maid coming into the room when he was not there and finding a note by the bed that read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes, wait." There were actually several accounts of housekeeping hearing a couple of voices in the room, particularly the voice of a man who was not checked in and who was not this person. On January 4th, a bellhop enters the room, which had been locked from the outside, and finds Roland on the floor covered in blood. He had been beaten and stabbed, but was still alive. Police were called to the scene and questioned him while he was still alive and asked him who had done this to him, and he said no one. He had just hit his head on the tub. Roland would die in the hospital several hours later without confirming any suspects. As police are looking for leads, they realized the name that he had given to the hotel was not his name. Police ended up running his sketch in the papers, but nobody was able to come forward to adequately identify him at the time. After about a year and a half from the murder, a woman comes forward from Alabama named Ruby Ogletree, who was able to identify this as her son, Artemis, who had been hitchhiking to California and left home at the age of 17. Unfortunately, till this day, there are still large parts of this case that are wide open and may never be solved, but that is the murder of room 1046. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is a case that is bone-chilling to me, and I remember the first time that I heard it too. This is the unsolved mystery of the Lady of the Dunes. On July 26th of 1974, a 12-year-old girl stumbles upon a woman laying face down on a beach blanket in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. As she gets a bit closer, she realizes what she's looking at is the body of a corpse. This woman had been laying there in the dunes for up to 3 weeks. She was found almost decapitated, her hands cut off, and a severe head wound that likely came from somebody who was laying there next to her in the sand. She was also found with a blue bandana and a pair of blue jeans that were under her head at the time that she died. And despite this massive public search effort to try to identify her, no one is ever able to come forward to accurately identify the Lady of the Dunes. The body has been exhumed multiple times, trying to scrap her new evidence, make more modern composites of her face, but despite all of that, the case still remains cold. One of the more recent theories is actually a connection to the 70s film Jaws, which had been filming that exact summer just about 100 miles away from Provincetown. In the film, an extra can be spotted who is wearing the exact same clothing that was found with the Lady of the Dunes. And side by side, she's also a very close match to the modern composite drawing. Despite a ton of public outreach, no one has ever come forward to either claim themselves to be or identify this extra. The case remains unsolved, and the question still remains, who was the Lady of the Dunes? Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is just an eerie case. This is the mysterious murder of Blair Adams. Adams was a construction worker living in British Columbia, and a few weeks prior to the events that took place, his friends and family noticed a very stark change in his personality. On July 5th, 1996, he withdraws all of his money from his accounts and leaves for the US unexpectedly. Eventually, he makes his way to Knoxville, Tennessee in this rental car. The rental car marks one of the first known sightings of Adams once he reaches the US at a gas station. While at the gas station, Adams asks an attendant to help him start his car. The attendant realizes he's using the wrong key and offers to help look. He asks him to check his pockets, which he refuses to do. He instead decides to leave the car at the gas station and just go to a nearby hotel. At around 5:30 p.m., Adams arrives at the Fairfield Inn, where he's seen outside pacing anxiously for almost an hour before he goes inside, gets a room, doesn't take his change, and doesn't go to the room, just leaves. This would also mark the last time Adams was ever seen alive. The following morning, the body of Blair Adams is discovered near a local construction site where he's covered in bruises, scratches, has a severe wound on his head, and a fatal wound to his abdomen. The strange part about this case is that all of Adams' belongings were found with his body. All of his cash, his jewels, the missing key to that car, and there was also a long strand of hair that was found in his hand, presumably ripped out from his attacker. Till this day, no one really knows why Adams traveled to Tennessee alone or who's behind the murder. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is a case that does not sit right with me. Today we are covering the unsolved death of Matrice Richardson. On September 16th, 2009, 24-year-old Matrice is arrested in Malibu in a very manic state. Her family is contacted and they beg officers to keep her in custody while she's in a state of distress so she's not a danger to herself, which they do not. Around 12:30 in the morning, she is completely released from custody. She is released without any of her belongings and she is completely alone. The last verified sighting would be around 6:30 a.m. that same morning when she's spotted up a hike spanning several miles into Montanito and she's seen in someone's backyard. The police are contacted for the trespassing, but she's gone before anybody even gets there, making this the last moment that she was seen alive. Follow for part 2. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is part 2 of the Mitrice Richardson case. So after she's spotted in the backyard at 6:30 in the morning, she would never be seen alive again. Mitrice goes missing for over 10 months, but she would eventually be found by rangers who spot her in a wooded creek area over 7 miles away from the sheriff's station. Her body is described as completely undressed, partially preserved, and her head is completely severed. Police officers are the first officials to arrive at the scene before anyone else. This is when the case gets unsettling. Police wait over 90 minutes before contacting the coroner to come to the scene. They then delay the coroner from coming for hours. There were also conflicting reports about the state in which the body was found, the location of the severed head, whether or not it was severed. In that time before the coroner gets there, the body is moved, the scene is disrupted, and the remains are completely collected before the coroner even has a chance to inspect the scene, and it's ruled an accidental death. The coroner even goes on to make a statement saying he had never seen a case in which remains were removed without the presence of a coroner. There's also new evidence that comes to light when security footage crops up from the night she was in custody in her cell, which her family was told did not exist. It does show Mitrice in her cell in severe distress, but the mystery of her death remains unexplained. Over the years, various investigators have weighed in on the case, and due to the nature of the remains and the handling of the scene, it's not off the table that foul play and or a cover-up might have been involved. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. Today we are covering the disappearance of Maura Murray. Maura is a 21-year-old college student studying nursing in Massachusetts in the year 2004. On February 9th, she sends an email to school letting them know she'll be gone for a week due to a family death, but no one in her family had died. Records that were obtained from her computer would show an earlier search on MapQuest for directions to Burlington, Vermont. At 3:40 p.m. on the same day, she would withdraw all of her money from a local ATM. At around 4 or 5 p.m., she takes off on this trip, having told no one, and just starts traveling up Interstate 91 North. Around 7:27 p.m., Maura's car is crashed on a sharp, snowy turn along Route 112 in New Hampshire, and a neighbor would call the police. Another driver who's returning home also passes her and offers to call for help. She pleads with him not to and insists that she's already called AAA, but phone records would later show that she never called AAA that night. The man carries on home, but decides to call 911 anyway. Between 7:27 and the police arriving at 7:46, Maura is gone. The car is found completely abandoned, and she's taken her cell phone and her credit cards, none of which have ever shown a record of being used since that night. That driver would be the last verified sighting of Maura. A witness would later come forward to report seeing a young person dressed in dark clothing traveling very quickly by foot around 8:30 p.m., roughly 4 to 5 miles up Route 112 on the same night. But it was never confirmed if this was Maura. It's been over 17 years since the disappearance, and the case has never been solved. This story is terrifying to me. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. Today we are covering the disappearance of Brandon Lawson. On August 8th, 2013, Brandon Lawson gets into a fight with his girlfriend. She believes he's under the influence, and he leaves at 11:54 p.m. to go to his dad's place. While driving after midnight, Brandon runs out of gas along Route 277 near Bronte, Texas, and he calls his brother for help. He speaks distressingly, claiming that he sees someone on the highway and that he's being followed, but it's unclear whether he might have been hallucinating or if he actually saw someone. Between 12:50 and 1:15 in the morning, Brandon would make a series of very distressing phone calls, one of which is to 911. For reasons unknown, he would leave his truck and then sprint into the woods off the highway. Officers and his brother arrive by 1:10 and find the truck completely abandoned. His brother then gets a call from Brandon where he's described as panicked and claims that he's bleeding. His brother asks where he is, and he replies, "I can see you, I'm right here." But neither police nor his brother can see or hear him anywhere. This is the last known call received from Brandon before he's deemed a missing person. The car is towed by morning, and he has never been seen since. But the question still haunts the family. Did Brandon really see someone on the highway that night? And if he did, where did he go? Do not watch this video if you are easily scared. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. Today we are covering a story, I think it was reported in 2019, about the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. The couple that reported the story wished to remain anonymous, so of course I am going to be respectful of that. The story does take place in the Rocky Mountains, which is a really popular location for sightseeing, for hiking. I've driven through there a couple of times. At some point on their hike, they're going way off the trail. They're just basically trekking through the woods. They're not even on a real path anymore. They stumble upon what they describe to be kind of like a small silo. It's basically just a tiny structure that has a door, but nothing else around it. This is pretty brave, but they decide to go explore and open the door. What they find inside is so eerie. They describe it as what sounds like a torture cell. They describe a single chair, they say there are chains in the corner, and they also report seeing a trap door in the floor which they knew they were not going to open. While they're there, they also report possibly hearing footsteps outside of this thing, so they immediately close the door and they head down on the hike as fast as they can. They get back to their car and they just head home. They're freaked out. It's never really clear whether or not they reported this to the police, which is maybe in part why they chose to remain anonymous, but they're still never clear what it is they walked in on. So what do you think this mysterious room is?